Hello again, book lovers. This is The Welfare State We're In by James Bartholomew, which I bought because it was recommended in another book. I love the title, and I got a hardback copy from 2004, which is when it was published. It's by James Bartholomew, who I knew nothing about. Apparently he's a banker. And as you might guess from the clever title, it's an anti-welfare state polemic, and a good old style polemic it is as well. Now then, your initial reaction is, why would you be against the welfare state, the NHS? And that's kind of the atmosphere from which I come. But I do remember when I read Heathcote Williams' anti-car polemic, I also began that from a point of view of, why would anybody dislike cars? I mean, I'd only seen them advertised, spoken well of, aspired to ownership of, etc., that kind of thing. Hadn't really considered the pollution and the danger and the way it changes the shapes of cities. So that fearsome polemic, in the form of a very long poem with a lot of interesting photographs, actually did make me flip. And since then, I've always considered cars to be nasty things. And I still do. They might be quieter and more electric now, but they still have a lot to answer for. Anyway, that's not the subject under discussion. What is the welfare state. It begins cunningly with a quiz, in which you can probably guess the surprising answers. Because this book is based on statistics. It's based on history. It's based on well-marshalled arguments. So if you're a fan of the welfare state, strap in and we'll see what Mr. Bartholomew thinks. Now he begins by charting the rise of uncouthness, the decline in standards. From Stanley Matthews to Vinnie Jones, if you know about football, that will give you a clue. And immediately did make me question the acclaim which we give to some people for being particularly violent. In the context of football, I didn't seem to notice it. But remember, this is 2004, so if Mr. Bartholomew is complaining about litter in the streets, swearing in public, I wonder what he'd say about 2025. So that's the initial take. Then we go on to a history of welfare, starting surprisingly far back. I'm going to leave a lot of gaps because I do recommend this book as an interesting read. Then number 3, the sacred cow, the NHS. The title here is the NHS, like a train crash every day. Apparently, statistically. This is an interesting chapter because he quotes Anoirin Bevin's initial hopes and dreams for what a national health system should look like, and it is a long way away from what it's supposed to be. Firstly, it wasn't supposed to replace private healthcare at all, so I didn't know that. I've been living in Spain for 30 years and I've long suspected that the NHS has a kind of aura about it which other health systems don't have. Maybe because it was the first. Maybe because it's become a kind of totem of socialist thinking. I don't know. Everybody expects it now, but it's been creaking as long as I can remember newspaper headlines. I myself am not particularly impressed with it from my personal experience. And I think the underlying question with this is, so what would you have instead of it? Because our author isn't suggesting that we just let the poor starve and die on the roadsides. He's suggesting that actually things like friendly societies and cooperatives made things better for the worse off in our societies. And again, that's some interesting social history that I didn't know about, backed up with some convincing statistics. See for yourself whether they've been cherry-picked if you read the book. Now, another thing that I had suspicions about is the education system, which is, again, torn to pieces in chapter 4. I'm also torn to pieces. On one side, I kind of believe in the Summerhill open planning, no syllabus, hey, we're all hippies here kind of approach. Teacher learning alongside student kind of appeals to me, but so does Ms. Birbalsing's academy, the Michaela Academy of London, which is famous for having queues of working class parents trying to get their kids in because it's a disciplined school. No talking in the corridors, kids sit in rows facing the teacher. Well, you can guess which one Mr. Bartholomew favours. Unfortunately, the stats have to back him up here. Are we getting more literate? Are we getting more educated? Are we getting cleverer? You be the judge. When I was reading this chapter, however, I was struck by the idea that the Singapore schools, which he's talking up, sound quite horrible to me. They sound like a less vibrant version of the Michaela school. Heck, they're a lot better at maths than we are. Also, this book, although it's only 21 years old, also shows its age because there are parts of computers in schools we've got to watch out. Well, of course, computers have been in schools now as a part of the furniture for so long that they're almost accepted, I suppose. The argument here is that they'll do away with critical thinking. Well, I'm not going to oppose anything that suggests we teach critical thinking, especially as we come into the age of AI and who knows what other advances. There are 6 chapters to go, folks. Number 5 has a picture of Ratchman, the slum landlord who everybody hated, pantomime villain, trying to get these people out of their houses. But again, why would he want to do that? And it turns out that it was because of government legislation that he was allowed to be able to make his money in such a poorly seen manner. And on the subject of housing, again, you can't really fault Bartholomew here, can you? I mean, even in my lifetime, I've seen tower blocks go up and the same tower blocks come down as considered failures. The piggeries being the name that stuck in my mind. And you look at the tenement blocks in Glasgow, and awful designs. When you look at it now, those concrete pathways between houses that nobody owned or took care of, and pretty easy to hide in if you're a junkie shooting up. And I know some people in the centre of Oxford who have this problem because they have to literally step over junkies to get into their social housing. And that was another insight that I hadn't thought about. Why is there only one way in and out of these places with hundreds and hundreds of residents? And this contributes to the breakup of the family, of course, because you could end up just being nowhere near. So, granny and granddad don't get to look after the kids as much. In fact, in the old days, they probably lived back to back. And that's another thing about in the healthcare. We just ship our old folk out to nursing homes now, don't we? Chapter 6 is parenting. Lots of evidence brought to bear here about how the laws are shaping our habits of the apes, as he calls it. Too many neglectful fathers, too many single parents. And again, when I hear the story of a single parent, you always think, well, that's amazing, that's brave, that's well done. But at the back of my mind, I can't help thinking, but wouldn't it have been better? And wouldn't you agree? And wouldn't the ideal thing be? And one of the threads of the argument that goes through this book is that all this is being undermined by social security. Pensions come next, and again, when you get onto these chapters, you think, yes, I've got my doubts there. Is it a Ponzi scheme? How does it work? There are certainly here in Spain lots of inconsistencies about how much money you get for how long you've worked, where you could end up working many years and get penalised for something, while somebody who's been working for 25 years would get the lot. Anyway, that's Spain. This is about English. By the way, this does centre on England. I'm sure he could extend his arguments to other countries, but Britain does seem to be a particularly egregious example. While on pensions, let me just divert to the idea of universal basic income, which is almost the opposite of what Bartholomew is arguing. I'm sure he's no fan of that at all. Yet I'm beginning to think that if we're going to keep on with this standard of living that we're used to, there are 2 perhaps unpopular things that we're going to need, one being population control. I mean, I know there are many angles to look at this from, but my simple head can't get around the fact that there seem to be too many people for too few resources, at least in Britain. And again, when you look at the stats, it's becoming ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, the percentage of the social welfare bill that we spend on pensions. Anyway, drawing the circle to a close, back to UBI. If we had UBI, there wouldn't be any pensions, there wouldn't be any disability benefits. I'm not sure how people's UBI would compare to what they're doing now, but, robots are coming, people. Chapter 8 analyses the tax system, and again, something that I didn't know for someone that reads so much history, is that almost nobody paid income tax at the beginning. The threshold was set very high. People relied a lot more on savings, especially with an eye to their pension. And we get a nice sketch of, some of these examples are real, but I think this is an imagined one, of how in April 2002 a woman who the state itself by its own metric considered to be in poverty would take £2,000 a year from you, plus council tax, plus if she likes a drink and a smoke, if she drives a car, buying petrol, etc, etc. At the end of this he says, Lloyd George would have been astonished, Beveridge uncomprehending, and Bevan disgusted. And it is a strange thing, we seem to have latched onto these ideas and followed them along as if on a galloping horse, without really looking too far into the future. Chapter 8 is about tax and growth, is a comparison of us v Singapore, which was interesting, but I didn't find as convincing as the other chapters. Chapter 9 gives us the reckoning, in which we summarise all the other stuff. And again, I think with all 2001 to 2025, who's got a national health dentist these days, for example? I don't think things have improved. The final chapter, and I should say at the end of each chapter there are lots of one or two sentence summings up of the main points, so it's well organised. Chapter 10, if the welfare state is so bad, why don't we get rid of it? Which, by the end of this, having been hit on the head with all the arguments, I began to wonder myself. Is UBI any kind of an answer? Or is that just a maximal kind of welfare state? In summary then, a very entertaining book, a right proper polemic of the correct style in which you argue all your points from as many directions as possible, backing them up with references and stats and that. I found very few cracks in the arguments, so if you're of a socialist bent you might like to have a go yourself. And one crack that I will mention is the idea of comparing how well we live with how much money we have, as a lot of the arguments are based on prosperity, seen as financial prosperity. And I'm not saying he's wrong, I'm just saying that there are other ways of measuring quality of life. And that said, I no doubt Mr. Bartholomew would say yes, and you would improve quality of life in every direction if you just got rid of all that bloody welfare state. So, shocking, but I kept turning the pages, found it very entertaining and challenging. From a pure reader's perspective, I'd say great fun.